The divine feminine, and many of you probably know what the divine feminine is, but if you don't know a lot about the divine feminine, the divine feminine is a energy, just like the divine masculine. It's an archetypal energy, and actually probably an actual being, an actual large part of God being. The divine feminine, the divine masculine together would, if you believe in God, would make up God, the full source. However, the divine feminine specifically is about the qualities of receptivity, nurturing, intuition, and these qualities have been denigrated in our society. This started a long time ago, I believe, when we were in more indigenous cultures. There was a better balance between the qualities of the masculine and the qualities of the feminine. Because when we were more indigenous, we lived within the cycles of the earth. The moon meant something. The sun rising and sun setting meant something. The seasons meant something. And if you look at some of the goddesses, like Demeter, who is a goddess of harvest and fertility, that was honored at that time. But regardless of when this happened or how this happened, we're in a place now where the divine feminine, the female parts, the intuitive parts, the parts that are connected to the earth, have been really shut down, not honored, and that has caused massive problems for humanity. That's sort of my quick recap on the divine feminine, which has held a lot of deep feminine knowledge, feminine wisdom, and they often knew herbalism or midwifery. And they might have visions. And what I believe may have happened is the powers that be, at some point, when you want to control a people, you don't want them to have any internal power. You want them to be sheep. So if you have your own internal power, your own knowing, your own sort of arrow of truth, those who want to control and manipulate aren't going to be happy with that. And so that, I believe, is where things started falling apart. There's also always been issues, I think, where the masculine has had some issue with blood and childbirth and that kind of thing. So when I started writing the book, I didn't realize I wanted to empower women. I just knew I knew I was supposed to write a book. That's what I knew. And I knew I'd been writing for years, and I had a ton of writing. It wasn't until I was writing the book, and even after I wrote the book and was, talking about the book, that I realized what I was talking about, what I was doing was, yes, empowering women, having women honor these parts of themselves that have been put down, having women say, yeah, this part of myself is good and I don't have to hide it. And I realized I was talking about an area, an intersection of the world, of the psyche, where love and spirit and magic and healing and witch all lived. Like there's an intersection of space where all these things happen, and it's a different space than, driving down the 405 freeway getting to your job. It's a different quality, a being quality. And I realized I was trying to open up my own process of healing, revealing my own process of healing, including how perspective shifts are healing. One of my stories is about a tragedy that happened. And then later in life, when I revisited it, I saw it from a different lens, not the lens of tragedy, but the lens of love and how healing that was. So the book moves through that kind of thing. Originally, I called the book I Am Witch, The Art of Becoming, which is an accurate title. However, there's a lot of people, not just women, but people out there who haven't yet said, I'm a witch. And that title would have thrown them off. It would have pushed away a whole group of people who could benefit from realizing, maybe I do have some qualities that are witchy, and maybe it's okay for me to embrace them. So it enabled me to say, you don't have to identify as a witch to read this book, but in reading this book, you may then identify as a witch. And that's why the title was changed to Love's Cauldron. What are the intuitive arts? And the intuitive arts are often way more populated by females. So some of the intuitive arts, and I'm going to bring up, before I get into all of them, I'm going to bring up soul collage, because I am a certified soul collage facilitator, and I run a monthly group, and I've run monthly group since I think 2006, for a long time. Soul collage is a process of taking images and making a collage and then finding the voice of the image. And it's extremely intuitive. And you have to reach into yourself to find that voice. You have to develop an intuition to work with soul collage. It's not a surface thing, it's a depth process. And I also work with soul collage in terms of using it like the tarot, like reading, and using it like psychodrama, where we take parts of a card and everyone in the group finds a voice for that part. You be the telephone, and you be the girl, and you be the mountain. And those parts start talking to each other, and we have something emerge that's very deep, that is very specific and helpful to the group and to the individual whose card it was. So that is an example of an intuitive art. It relies on visual art, group process, intuition, creativity, finding your inner voice. Now, other intuitive arts could be using a pendulum, which I do, rituals, astrology, tarot, Reiki, therapy. When you're a therapist, which I am, you might have a ton of training behind you, which I do, but you also are sitting with a person and you're receiving images and you're receiving thoughts and you're using your intuition and go, like, I see patterns. Oh, this is where this person's work is. This is where they're stuck. And that is an intuitive process that comes through the lens of the training, but it's completely an art and intuition. When I went to grad school to become a therapist, a psychotherapist, we did a lot of book learning. We learned all kinds of amazing, wonderful things, a lot of ideas, but we weren't specifically talked to about what's your intuition telling you about this person. We were taught to listen, to reflect back, to rely on certain theories, but the intuitive part was not specifically given a place. Love's Cauldron does give the readers permission to tap into and embrace their intuition, because they're reading so much that is about the intuitive journey, the healing journey, how those things interface. And it helps open us up out of this rational, logical, where everything 1 + 1 = 2, the flatlands, I call that the flatlands, rather than the depths of what wants to emerge. So as you read the book about what wanted to emerge for me, you will start identifying what wants to emerge for you. When we mistreat people, marginalized group, women, witches, which as we know happens every second of every day, it is because we do not understand who they are. We do not understand that they are the same as us. We think they are different, and we think we are better. And so we get rid of, we punish, we don't treat fairly, things we don't understand, things we don't identify with. And this has a lot to do with projection. We put on others disowned aspects of ourselves. So if you were a male, say, who is very bookish and shut down, we'll use shut down because witches are generally not shut down, and you've got this woman who's talking about her feelings and what she's imagining and what she's hearing and what she's seeing, you're going to think she's crazy because you can't do that. You are someone who lives by the book, and you live in the flatlands, as I call it. And this causes massive, massive problems. So an important thing in developing your witch qualities is opening up yourself. And the first step, I believe, of opening up oneself is to be open to feelings, because our feelings are, I would even call them energy portals. Our feelings allow us to connect to others, to connect to the earth, to know who we are. Our feelings are really, really important. And another way of opening up is, so for instance, one of my early lessons, I don't know if that's the right word, and as I was developing, this is years ago, I had a lot of fear, but I also had intuition. And I would hear voices like, you should do this, you shouldn't do that. But I didn't know if it was a fear voice talking or my intuition talking. And I had to learn to sort out the difference between what is intuition and what is fear. The intuition voice generally was more positive than the fear voice, but it still took work to start separating these apart. So I would be influenced by my guides, my intuition, rather than historical fear that was embedded within me. The skill I had to work on, because I always had access to feelings. I was a crybaby, as they said, when I was growing up, because I was so sensitive. Everything that wasn't positive. I grew up in a very difficult environment, and I cried a lot because it was so upsetting. It was upsetting to see the animals get hurt or sold or whatever, someone get punished or my father yell. So in terms of being competent and conscious of one's feelings, and again, there's a lot of people who are competent and conscious of their feelings, and then there's a lot who aren't, who get stuck in anger, but they don't know that down below the anger, they're feeling shame, or they get stuck in fear and they don't see their power, or they don't understand where this fear came from. So we often get stuck in the surface feelings instead of the deeper feelings. If you're going to develop your intuition and your witchiness, you have to be able to get down into what's really going on. Why is this situation challenging to me? Because that opens a channel to your intuition. You're not clogged with all this unidentified stuff. So in order to open ourselves up to ourselves more completely, there's a lot of development that can be done in terms of intuition, in terms of realizing when we're channeling. And channeling, for instance, you might be writing and you're actually channeling, or we might be setting up a ritual and something comes through and we're aware, oh, I need to do this or put that there. There's a lot of channeling that happen that people do unconsciously. They're not even aware of it. And why can't we own our channeling and say, hey, that was, I was helped with that came through. There's such a thing as talking to our guides, learning to access guidance, which I generally use a pendulum to do. There's trusting the parts of ourselves that are not logical and not rational. So even though I have obviously logical and rational parts, I trust the parts of me that don't fit into that world. One of my hopes with the readers of Love Cauldron is that the reader will take a deep dive into what is possible in terms of feeling, in terms of intuition, in terms of channeling, in terms of hearing, I was taking a walk and my uncle had died recently and I felt his energy. He came for a visit. To open up the ability to realize what is possible in our lives. So we don't just shut things down or dismiss things. We allow these magical events to occur. And to do that, we have to become fully conscious, not just of the five senses, but also of things that come through us, awarenesses, thoughts, visions, hearing things. And I don't mean hearing with the ear, I mean hearing in our head. There's things that we can open up to and become more conscious of that will help us sort of step more fully into the parts of us that are witchy. Healing and spiritual and emotional growth, those are not exactly the same. I mean, let's think about this for a second. So healing, what is healing? Healing is making whole. Many of us are fragmented. You might have a part that gets angry, a part that gets sad, a part that wants to punish, a part that is kind. We have these parts, and they could be very archetypal. We could be the good mother, we can be the bitch, we can be the punisher, we can be the one who pushes away. We have these parts. Healing is integrating and making whole, whereas being spiritual is being opened and aligned with higher principles. And I'm going to give you an example so Wicca, I didn't really know what Wicca was at one point, and then I started reading about it. I'm like, oh, I identify with that, I identify with that, I identify with that. Wiccan philosophy, I really like it. It works for me. And the Wiccan philosophy is that the earth is alive and we are part of a much bigger system. There are other beings, like the tree is a being. And that is a form of spirituality. Now, it's not the same spirituality as Jesus is my savior, which can also be a spirituality, or picking someone who represents a high way of being or embodied a high way of being. But there's other forms of spirituality. For me, it is definitely nature-based and universe-based, where the planets have specific qualities, energies. The North Star has a different quality than the moon. The moon is emotional. The North Star is a guidance point. So now being healed and being spiritual is certainly going to be easier than being unhealed and being spiritual. Because when you're unhealed, you're fragmented and you can go all over the place. Whereas if you're healed, you're going to hold a much clearer trajectory and vision of who you are and what matters to you. Let me talk a little more about these things as related to witch. So the word witch, as we know, has been demonized. The horrible witch, the wicked witch of the whoever. And witches ride broomsticks and they have black cats and they're out on Halloween and they do horrible things. And where all that stuff came from, I'm not entirely sure. But the witch is actually some kind of a healer. The witch heals by using the feminine qualities, whether it's intuiting or understanding herbs or being a healer in some other way. So the witch relates to the divine feminine because the witch is a more human version of the divine feminine. The witch is embodied in a human form. The witch is not out next to Pluto. The witch is on the earth. Whereas the divine feminine probably resides, I would assume, is interfaced into all beingness. The witch is an embodied being, and embodiment is also an important part of witchery. Embodiment means we are in our physical bodies. We haven't passed on. We're not in in some other dimension. We're in a body. We're in a body that feels, that bleeds, that is vulnerable, that needs to be tended to, that needs to be healed. How many of us haven't had something happen where we need to be tended to and healed? So embodiment also has to do with the cycles of the planet, the cycles of the seasons. We live within this specific environment that is embodied, and yet we access spirit through it, and there is spirit within it. Because being a witch is partly about healing, it would imply kindness. Kindness means we are in connection with oneness. It means we realize that others are maybe different than us, but also equal to us. That we're all in this together. This is a we situation. This is not a I'm above you and you're below me situation. And so finding our hearts and finding our kindness is a big part of evolving into a developed, refined witch, an evolved witch. I think that if you are unkind, what are you living out of? What unhealed part of yourself are you living out of? Why are you being punitive? Why are you punishing? That points to a deep entitlement, possibly shame, many, many things there. That is not what witchery is about. And so again, we are in a universe with many other beings. We're not egocentric. We are more holistic. And so there are divas, little plant spirits, little water spirits. There are animal spirits. There are tree spirits. The wind has a spirit. We have guides. We all have a team of guides who are not embodied, helping us in this embodied journey we're on. And we're all on an embodied journey where we have to do our best to figure out who we are, what we're doing on this planet, find meaning, and find some happiness despite what happens around us. I think that's part of understanding that we're in a universe that is populated by many, many beings and many helpers and many protectors. But let's see, channeling. So we'll use the tarot as an example. So I know all the cards. I know what they mean. And if I did a card reading for someone, I would look at the cards and I would start piecing together a story. And there would be some channeling involved where I might know that this card for this person meant something specific, whereas it might mean something else for another person. Different people channel differently. Some people hear, some people have this sense of someone sitting on their shoulder talking to them. Some people have visions and so on and so forth. Some people have physical sensations, but channeling is something that probably everyone on the planet has the capacity to learn if they clear themselves of all the stuff that blocks it. And in Love's Cauldron, because you're reading about all these different things that I've experienced or done, you begin to identify with them and go, oh, I do that. or that makes sense. I can see myself being able to do that because it opens up a perceptual doorway to what's possible. Back to the divine feminine. So the patriarchy, the flatlands, would have you believe that the divine feminine, good or bad, there's good, there's bad. It takes complexity and reduces it to black and white. Instead of, the divine feminine is very complex. The divine feminine is a massive energy that isn't about good and bad. It's about nurturing. It's about the harvest. It's about fertility. It's about embodiment. It's about caring for others. It's about holding. It's about many, many things. It's not, the good, bad doesn't even enter into it. It just is a qualities that are part of being. Now, I don't want to do this without some rationality and logic. That's part of what we need. But if we just take rationality and logic and put it on a pedestal and we get rid of all this other stuff, we're in it's a desert of a world. This goes back to the witch trials. Again, projection. My crops failed because you cursed them. Or my son died because you cursed my son. It steps out of this holistic picture of things happening because this is part of life, things happen, and tries to make it about good and bad. I'm innocent. You did it. You're bad. It's again projection, and it also was a way of scaring people, controlling people, making people afraid of their own internal wisdom and power. That whole period, that whole ugly piece of history was coming out from people who were not healed, were very, very, I would say, infested with bad energy, and didn't in any way, shape, or form know how to honor what they didn't understand. And that has continued through history as power and control has often destroyed beings with great, great internal power and wisdom. One of the things that I'm trying to do in Love's Cauldron is challenge narratives, rewrite narratives that have hurt women, that have confined women, that have disempowered women, so that women, and not just women, but men's feminine qualities, people's feminine qualities can be held, can be honored, and not punished and disempowered. One of my goals is that we all become more active in claiming the parts of ourselves, and not see witch as this weird bad word, like this weird deformed human, but witch is natural, witch is feminine, witch is it's just another archetype, like a shaman or a farmer. It's just somebody with a collection of skills that are valuable. A farmer, a priest, a father, a mother. All these things are archetypal. They're also individual, but they're archetypal. And witch is an archetype of healing through the feminine means, the qualities that the feminine has, the feminine wisdom, the feminine ability to heal, the feminine ability to have highly attuned intuition. And so we want to redefine witch as something that's part of all of us and positive, or potential for all of us to access at least a little bit of it. So an example that comes up for me is, let's take a doctor who's had years and years of medical training and definitely lives in the world of science. That's great. We need that. And the doctor also needs his intuition. So when he's got his scalpel out, he also has feelings and thoughts and ideas about what he needs to do. Or a naturopath who might look at the whole complex system of the body and go, but where should I start? And the intuitive self might say, for this person, we start here. So blending, or being able to hold both the masculine and the feminine and have them work together, really is the highest use of these parts of ourselves.